absolute truth? Since everything is relative, the purpose of an education is not to learn truth or master the facts, but rather simply to acquire a skill so that you can go out and obtain wealth, power, and fame. Truth has become irrelevant. Therefore, the Christian can never look upon the truth with apathy or disdain. Rather, we cherish and treasure the truth as a reflection of God Himself. Our churches are filled with Christians whose minds are idling in intellectual neutral. Not an apathetic faith, a brain-dead faith. Rather, it is a living, active, and inquiring faith. As St. Anselm put it, ours is a faith that seeks understanding. God wants to use you to impact others for Christ, for the church's sake, for your own sake, for your children's sake. Do not squander this opportunity.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to another video from Northeast Christian Apologetics. My name's Simon Williams, and today you're watching the live stream that we do every Monday night, 6 p.m. at 6 p.m. Eastern. Sasha says, checking in. Thank you for checking in. I appreciate it. I appreciate you guys whenever you leave comments in the chat and interact. Sounds good. I like it, being able to interact with you guys. But I hope everybody's been having a good week. Hope everyone's been being healthy and being considerate and been studying Christianity in their free time. Been studying arguments for the existence of God and things of that nature. Last week we finished up part one, kind of, even beyond that. We did the intermission last week, which is to tie together part one and part two of this book, The Reason for God, that we're reading. We're going to be diving into part two today, which is going to be Keller's reasons for believing in Christianity. And he thinks that these reasons are sufficient to warrant belief, okay? That somebody of a normal or reasonable cognitive faculties will be able to reasonably infer that Christianity is true. That's what he's going for. He's not going for a compelling belief. He doesn't think that there are very many arguments to do that for pretty much anything, and that's true. There are ways in which you can produce reasons for rejecting pretty much any proposition. That's just the nature of philosophy and why some people despise philosophy. But what we are going for is reasonable inference. Okay, so just a reminder, Timothy Keller is the author of this book, and he has a ministry called Gospel and Life that still have his sermons. I highly recommend checking out his ministry and checking out his sermons as well as his books. Very useful. You can get this book at christianbooks.com as well as amazon.com. If you would like to listen to the book being read without my input or my insights or my stumbling and struggling to read, then I recommend getting the Audible version. We are still on the path of getting more subscribers, as always, because this is YouTube. So if you haven't already, consider subscribing. If you think that this content is useful and is able to benefit the kingdom of God, give me a thumbs up or give me a like. Appreciate it. All right. So with the YouTube stuff out of the way, and by the way, those pictures aren't regularly updated, so those prices may not be accurate. You never know when there's a Amazon deal or a sale going on ChristianBooks.com. But go check it out yourself. We are up to chapter 8, The Clues of God. And in this chapter, it's been a long time since I've read The Reason for God by Tim Keller, so I'm not entirely sure what he presents in this chapter, but I'm sure that it is good. So let's go ahead and jump over to the reading page. Okay, so chapter 8, Keller starts off with, if one puts aside the existence of God and survival after life as too doubtful, and the survival after life as too doubtful, one has to make up one's mind as to the use of life. If death ends all, if I have neither to hope for good nor to fear evil, I must ask myself what I am here for, and how in these circumstances I must conduct myself. Now the answer is plain, but so unpalatable that most will not face it. There is no meaning for life, and thus life has no meaning. It was true, I had always realized it. I hadn't any right to exist at all. I had appeared by chance. I existed like a stone, a plant, a microbe. I could feel nothing to myself but an inconsequential buzzing. I was thinking that here we are eating and drinking to preserve our precious existence, and that there's nothing, absolutely no reason for existing. All right, so this is... This is going to be looking at, remember, whenever I talk about this kind of stuff, we're contrasting worldviews here. All right. So right now we're contrasting the Christian worldview with an alternative worldview. And as I've said in previous videos, and I'm going to keep saying it, we must always ask the question, why should I prefer my worldview over a competing worldview? And right now we're going to be looking at, competing worldviews in the form of naturalism and the byproducts of naturalism. Okay, why should we prefer Christianity over a naturalistic worldview? Okay, so let's see how Keller presents it. Excuse me. How can we believe in Christianity if we don't even know whether God exists? Though there cannot be irrefutable proof for the existence of God, many people have found strong clues for his reality, divine fingerprints in many places. I once met regularly with a brilliant young scientist who was haunted by a general sense that God existed. Much of what I am writing in this chapter and the next I discovered during my conversations with him. He looked at one argument for God after another, and though many of them had a great deal of merit, he found that ultimately every one of them was rationally avoidable at some point. This troubled him greatly. I can't believe unless I find at least one absolutely airtight proof for God, he said to me. I pointed out to him that he was assuming strong rationalism, and he got some relief when together we realized that he had no airtight proof for that. Then we began to go back and review the lines of reasoning that he had called proofs, and began to look at them instead as clues. When we went about it with the perspective, he began to see that cumulatively the clues of God had a lot of force to them. The philosopher Alvin Plantinga believes that there are no proofs of God that will convince all rational persons. However, he believes that there are at least 2 or 3 dozen very good arguments for the existence of God. Most readers who take the time to think through Plantinga's list will find some items compelling and others not. However, the accumulated weight of the ones you find appealing can be very formidable. I will trace out just a handful of them. The mysterious bang. Those of a more rational mindset have always been fascinated by the question, why is there something rather than nothing? This question has become even more interesting to people in the wake of the Big Bang Theory. There's evidence that the universe is expanding explosively and outwardly from a single point. Stephen Hawking wrote, "Almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang." Scientist Francis Collins puts this clue in layman's language in his book, The Language of God. We have this very solid conclusion that the universe had an origin, the Big Bang. 15 billion years ago, the universe began with an unimaginably bright flash of energy from an infinitesimally small point. That implies that before that, there was nothing. I can't imagine how nature, in this case the universe, could have created itself. And the very fact that the universe had a beginning implies that someone was able to begin it. And it seems to me that had to be outside of nature. All right, so this is a classic, one of the most heavily discussed arguments for the existence of God. This is the Kalam cosmological argument. All right, so premise 1, whatever begins to exist has a cause for its existence. Number 2, the universe began to exist, and therefore 3, the conclusion, the universe has a cause for its existence. All right, and usually people then go on to explain that the cause of the universe, which is all of in this case, classically understood, the universe meaning all of space, time, matter, and energy. Okay, and if space, time, and energy had a beginning, then that would mean that the cause must be immaterial, spaceless, timeless, enormously powerful, intelligent, personal, these kinds of things. All right, so let's see how Keller continues. Everything we know in this world is contingent, has a cause outside of itself. Therefore, the universe, which is just a huge pile of such contingent entities, would itself have to be dependent on some cause outside of itself. Something had to make the Big Bang happen. But what? What could there be but something outside of nature, a supernatural, non-contingent being that exists from itself? Sam Harris, in his review of Francis Collins' books, makes a classic objection to this line of reasoning. In any case, he writes, even if we accepted that our universe simply had to be created by an intelligent being, this would not suggest that this being is the God of the Bible. That is perfectly right. If we are looking at this as an argument proving the existence of a personal God, it doesn't get us all the way there. However, if we are looking for a clue that there is something beside the natural world, it is very provocative for many people. All right, so this idea right here where he's saying that it's right that that we are looking at, if we are looking at this as an argument proving the existence of a personal God, it doesn't get us all the way there. That's not right. Okay, so the Kalam cosmological argument does give you a cause that has a personhood, because if we're talking about cause and effects occur when the initial conditions are sufficient to produce the effect. Okay, if we're talking about impersonal effects, impersonal causes, if there's an impersonal cause that's sufficient to produce the effect, then the effect occurs. Okay, if the universe had a beginning for its existence and the cause was impersonal and eternal, then the universe, as an effect of an impersonal cause that's sufficient to produce the universe, would have produced the universe eternally. Okay, but if the cause of the universe is a person that is able to choose when to actualize effects, then it doesn't need to be eternal. God, a personal being can choose when to actualize its effects. Okay, so and also I'm sensing some in this part of the book some combination of the Leibnizian cosmological argument with the Kalam. There's a little bit of mixing here because he's talking about contingency. The Leibnizian cosmological argument definitely does deal with contingency, but not in the sense that Keller is saying here, because he's using contingent in the sense that it has a cause, that it's dependent on something. But contingency, normally put, is just it could have been otherwise. Okay, and the Leibnizian cosmological argument deals with explanations, like why is the universe the way that it is, and that calls out for an explanation. And in that argument, the explanation for why the universe is the way that it is brought about by a non-contingent personal entity. All right, very subtle differences here, but they're important. All right, so Keller continues. The cosmic welcome mat. For organic life to exist, the fundamental regularities and constants of physics, the speed of light, the gravitational constant, the strength of the weak and strong forces, strong nuclear forces, must all have values that together fall into an extremely narrow range. The probability of this perfect calibration happening by chance is so tiny as to be statistically negligible. Again, Collins puts it well. When you look from the perspective of a scientist at the universe, it looks as if it knew we were coming. There are 15 constants, the gravitational constant, various constants about the strong and weak nuclear force, etc., that have precise values. If any one of those constants were off by even 1 part in a million, or in some cases by 1 part in a million, the universe could not have actually come to the point where we see it. Matter would not have been able to coalesce. There would have been no galaxies, no stars, planets, or people. So we're jumping directly into the fine-tuning argument. All right. And if you want a more in-depth view of these arguments, we went through them in a more in-depth view when we went through On Guard. So that's a great place to get a more in-depth kind of view of these arguments. So it looks like we're just going to be getting touches of this, but this is the fine-tuning argument dealing with like the constants and quantities. We're talking about the laws of nature, and when the laws of nature are given mathematical expression, you find within them certain constants, and these constants are finely tuned in order to support life like we observe, like life like us, you and me. We are very fragile creatures. And so if something like the gravitational force was multiplied by 1 billion times, which seems like a lot, but it's actually very small with regard to the possible ranges that these constants can take on, which we know from comparing the gravitational force with the strong nuclear force. If you multiply the force of gravity by 1 billion, you would crush everything instantly, And that is actually a very small change in the scope of what's possible. And there's a lot more to this as well. But yeah, the fine-tuning argument is understood to be one of the more powerful evidences for the existence of God. And there's a lot of varieties of the teleological argument. But yeah, I'm a fan of it. I do think it's a little overrated with regard to like presenting it to people, because in order to make a more effective case on the fine-tuning of the universe, it's good to actually know what the values are. And that's a lot of numbers to memorize, and equations and stuff. And so it may not be suitable for everyone. Anyway, all right, so Keller continues, some have said that it is as if there were a large number of dials that all had to be tuned to within extremely narrow limits. And they were. It seems extremely unlikely that this would happen by chance. Stephen Hawking concludes, the odds against a universe like ours emerging out of something like the Big Bang are enormous. Oh, and that's an understatement. I think there are clearly religious implications. Elsewhere, he says it would be very difficult to explain why the universe would have begun in just this way, except as the act of a God who intended to create beings like us. This has been called the fine-tuning argument or the anthropic principle, namely that the universe was prepared for human beings. As an argument, it must be a pretty powerful one because there are a lot of fierce rebuttals being published about it. The most common rejoinder with which Richard Dawkins makes in his book, The God Delusion, is that there are many, or that there may be trillions of universes, the multiverse, Given the enormous number of universes existing over enormous amounts of time and space, it is inevitable that some of them are fine-tuned to sustain our kind of life, and that the one we are in this one, so here we are, okay? But there's a lot of problems with this view, this multiverse view. One, there's no evidence that there's no evidence in favor of the multiverse that makes it that we should prefer it over the God hypothesis. Okay, all the evidence is compatible with both. Okay. Another thing about the multiverse is that what you're conceding in the multiverse is that, yes, the constants are changeable. Okay. But why is that the case? Why is it the case that the universes can be different? And so that deals with metaphysics. So you need to have a metaphysical model of the universe that's able to explain that. That needs an explanation. And there's a lot of different problems with this multiverse approach. But another one that I personally find very compelling is that these things change the aspects, or correction, if these constants can change and there's different types of universes, then it's much more likely that you are just like a brain and a brain, and you are the only active observer in the universe, and you're just having illusions of this grand universe around you. And so there's a lot of problems with this, but let's go ahead and continue with what Keller's saying. Again, as a proof, the fine-tuning argument is rationally avoidable, though there's not a shred of proof that there are many universes. There's also no way to prove that there aren't. However, as a clue, this line of thinking has force. Alvin Plantinga gives this illustration. He imagines a man dealing himself 20 straight hands of 4 aces in the same game of poker. As his companions reach for their 6-shooters, the poker player says, I know it looks suspicious, but what if there is an infinite succession of universes so that for any possible distribution of poker hands, there is one universe in which this possibility is realized. We just happen to find ourselves in one where I always deal myself 4 aces without cheating. This argument will have no effect on the other poker players, even though it's philosophically viable. It's a philosophically viable option, but come on. All right, it is technically possible that the man just happened to deal himself 20 straight hands of 4 aces, though you could not prove he had cheated. It would be unreasonable to conclude that he hadn't. Okay? What we're trying to deal with here is reasonable inference. Okay, what is reasonable to conclude? And so that's what we're going for here. The philosopher John Leslie poses a similar illustration. He imagines a man who is sentenced to be executed by a firing squad consisting of 50 expert marksmen. They all fire from 6 feet away, and not one bullet hits him. Since it is possible that even expert marksmen could miss from close range, it is technically possible that all 50 just happened to miss at the same moment. Though you could not prove they had conspired to miss, it would be unreasonable to draw the conclusion that they hadn't. It is technically possible that we just happen to be in the one universe in which organic life occurred. One thing I'm going to note with this shooter analogy is that some people use this shooter analogy in order to say that they think that Christians are using this shooter analogy in order to say that God intervened. Okay. That God himself is the reason why the shooters missed. And when that's not what the point of the analogy. The point of the analogy is that there's some design involved. Like all 50 shooters missed because they intended, it was their will to miss you. Okay? All right, let me adjust my thing real quick here. All right, sorry about that. All right, so as Keller was saying, though you could not prove that the fine-tuning of the universe was due to some sort of design, it would be unreasonable to draw the conclusion that it wasn't. Although organic life could have just happened without a creator, does it make sense to live as if that infinitely remote chance is true? The regularity of nature, This is one of my favorites. I also think that this is related to the fine-tuning argument. There is something about nature that is much more striking and inexplicable than its design. All scientific inductive reasoning is based on the assumption of the regularity, the laws of nature, that water will boil tomorrow under the identical conditions of today. The method of induction requires generalizing from observed cases to all cases of the same kind. Without inductive reasoning, we couldn't learn from experience. We couldn't use language. We couldn't rely on our memories. Most people find that normal and untroubling, but not philosophers. David Hume and Bertrand Russell, as good secular men, were troubled by the fact that we haven't got the slightest idea of why nature regularity is happening now. And moreover, we haven't the slightest rational justification for assuming it will continue tomorrow. If someone would say, well, the future has always been like the past, in the past, Hume and Russell reply that you are assuming the very thing you are trying to establish. To put it another way, science cannot prove the continued regularity of nature. It can only take it on faith. There have been many scholars in the last decades who have argued that modern science arose in its most sustained form out of Christian civilization because of its belief in all-powerful personal God who created and sustains an orderly universe. As a proof for the existence of God, the regularity of nature is escapable. You can always say we don't know why things are the way they are. As a clue for God, however, it is helpful. I think it's enormously helpful, to be honest with you, because like when you think of the complexity of the universe, like we're talking about the interactions of these atomic particles and subatomic particles that obey rules and laws and behave in a certain way, and if that were to just go away, like that would cause absolute chaos. Everything would devolve into complete incoherent mess. But why is it? Why is it that the universe is stable even on such a tiny scale? It is very difficult. The universe. All right. So when we talk about naturalism is the viewpoint that space-time and energy, as we find it in its different forms, are the only things that exist. And what Hume points out frequently is that we don't have enough justification for making causal inferences. And he's also saying that we don't have any justification for induction. So what people do in order to make science compatible with naturalism is that they take on what is called the uniformity hypothesis. And the uniformity hypothesis just states what we observed, basically, that the universe is going to behave in accordance with how it has behaved in the past and in different locations. But that's taken on by faith. But some people will say that we believe in the uniformity hypothesis because of the regularity that we observe. And even if it's just a very small addition to the evidence towards the uniformity hypothesis, then it still counts. But when they do that, they actually just misunderstand the problem of induction, okay? No amount of evidence justifies the uniformity hypothesis. You have to take it on faith. But the Christian worldview is different. People will combat the Christian worldview and say that, if you have an interactionist God, like the Christian God, that interacts with the universe and stuff, then that doesn't solve the problem because God can change the laws whenever he wants. Okay. And so you don't have, you still have the same problem with our uniformity hypothesis, but that's not true. We're not saying that the universe is going to we as Christians are not saying that the universe is going to behave consistently without error, or not without error, but indefinitely. What we say is that this universe was created by a orderly and good God and dependable God, and that it will behave in a way that's orderly in accordance with God's will and for our good. So, and each action doesn't demonstrate that the universe is going to behave always in the way that we have observed it, but each observation helps us to understand that God is trustworthy. Okay, we're building trust with God, I see a comment from Salem that says, here's the problem. Even if I was to agree with you that the universe was designed, I don't. It still doesn't prove the Christian God. You need to, first, demonstrate that the Christian God actually exists. You don't need to demonstrate that the Christian God actually exists in order for you to prove through another argument that God exists. It literally makes no sense. Like we would have no need to appeal to the fine-tuning argument if we could demonstrate that God exists. And we've already talked about our ability to demonstrate the existence of God in the way that you're probably talking about, where it's like presenting him like an object. That's not something that we can do. We don't have the power to do that. God doesn't relate to our world like that. So, but anyway, but yeah, let's see what Keller says. Keller continues, there have been many scholars in the last decades who have argued that modern science arose. Oh, yeah. So we've already read this part. They are clues to God and are helpful. All right. So Keller continues, the clue of beauty. Arthur C. Danto, the art critic at The Nation, once described a work of art that gave him a sense of obscure but inescapable meaning. In other words, while great art does not hit you over the head with a simple message, it always gives you a sense that life is not a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. It fills you with hope and gives you the strength to carry on, though you cannot define what it is that moves you. Leonard Bernstein once rhapsodized about the effect of Beethoven on him. Beethoven turned out pieces of breathtaking rightness. Rightness, that's the word. When you get the feeling that whatever note succeeds the last is the only possible note that can rightly happen at that instant, in that context, then chances are you're listening to Beethoven. Melodies, fugues. What is this word? Fugues. Melodies, fugues, rhythms. Leave them to. Oh man. Oh man, what is this one? Tchaikovsky's. Tchaikovsky's and Hinden's myths and Ravel's. Our boy has the real goods, the stuff from heaven, the power to make you feel at the finish. Something is right in the world. There's something that checks throughout, that follows its own law consistently, something we can trust that will never let us down. If there is no God and everything in this world is the product of, as Bertrand Russell famously put it, an accidental collocation of atoms, then there is no actual purpose for which we were made. We are accidents. If we are the products of accidental natural forces, then what we call beauty is nothing but a neurological hardwired response to particular data. You only find certain scenery to be beautiful because you had ancestors who knew you would find food there, and they survived because of that neurological feature. And now we have it too. In the same way, though music feels significant, that significance is an illusion. Love, too, must be seen in this light. If we are the result of blind natural forces, then what we call love is simply a biochemical response inherited from ancestors who survived because this trait helped them survive. Bernstein and Danto are testifying to the fact that even though we as secular people believe that beauty and love are just biochemical responses, in the presence of great art and beauty, we inescapably feel that there is real meaning in life. There is truth and justice that will never let us down, and love means everything. Notice that Bernstein, though by no means an orthodox religious person, can't refrain from even using the term heaven when talking about Beethoven. We may, therefore, be secular materialists who believe truth and justice, good and evil are complete illusions, but in the presence of art and even great natural beauty, our hearts tell us another story. Another prominent artist who is apparently telling us the same thing is John Updike. In his short story, Pigeon Feathers, a young teenager says to this mother, Don't you see? If when we die, there's nothing. All your sun and fields and whatnot are all horror. It's just an ocean of horror. Later, in the presence of the beauty of pigeon feathers and in their texture and color, he is overwhelmed by a certainty that there is a God behind the world who will allow him to live for eternity. Updike seems to be saying that regardless of the beliefs of our mind about the random meaninglessness of life, before the face of beauty, we know better. So what? Someone might object. Just because we feel something is true doesn't make it so. Are we, however, only talking about feelings here? What is evoked in these experiences more accurately appetite or desire? Goethe refers to this as a oh man. Let's see what. Well, it's blessed. All right, I can't pronounce. Selig sun such. Blessed longing. We not only feel the reality, but also the absence of what we long for. St. Augustine, in his Confessions, reasoned that these unfulfilled desires are clues to the reality of God. How so? And so did C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis also felt like this was clues for God, these desires, these needs that we feel. How so? Indeed, as it was just objected, just because we feel the desire for a steak dinner doesn't mean we will get it. However, while hunger doesn't prove that the particular meal desired will be procured, doesn't the appetite for food in us mean that food exists? Isn't it true that innate desires correspond to real objects that can satisfy them, such as sexual desire corresponding to sex, physical appetite corresponding to food, tiredness corresponding to sleep, rational desires corresponding to friendship? Doesn't the unfulfilled longing evoked by beauty qualify as an innate desire? We have a longing for joy, love, and beauty that no amount or quantity of food, sex, friendship, or success can satisfy. We want something that nothing in this world can fulfill. Isn't that at least a clue that this something that we want exists? This unfulfillable longing then qualifies as a deep innate human desire, and that makes it a major clue that God is there. The clue killer. In our culture, there is a very influential school of thought that claims to have the answers to all of these so-called clues. This is the school of evolutionary biology that claims everything about us can be explained as a function of natural selection. A book that seeks to explain all clues about God in this way is Breaking the Spell: Religion as a Natural Phenomenon by Daniel Dennett. Dennett claims that if we have religious feelings, it is only because those traits once helped certain people survive their environment in greater numbers and therefore pass that genetic code on to us. He sums up his view when he writes, "Everything we value, from sugar and sex and money to music and love and religion, we value for reasons. Lying behind and distinct from our reasons are evolutionary reasons, free-floating rationales that have been endorsed by natural selection." In the New York Times Magazine, Robin Marantz Hinig surveyed what evolutionists think about religion in an article, "Why Do We Believe? How Evolutionary Science Explains Faith in God." We know that the idea of an infallible God is comfortable and familiar, something children readily accept. Why? Some evolutionists, such as David Sloan Wilson, think a belief in God made people happier and more unselfish, which meant their families and tribes survived and they got better mates. Others, such as Scott Atran and Richard Dawkins, posit that belief in God is an accidental byproduct of other traits that did give adaptive advantage. Our ancestors who survived were most prone to detect agents in the bush even when they weren't there, and were most likely to impose narratives, causal reasoning on everything that happened around them. However, these same traits make us more likely to believe in God, to see agents and narratives and and intelligences where they don't actually exist. Despite fierce debates within the field, evolutionary theorists all agree that our capacity to believe in God is hardwired into our physiology because it was directly or indirectly associated with traits that helped our ancestors adapt to their environment. That's why arguments for God appeal to so many of us, and that's That's all there is to it. The clues are clues to nothing. However, there are many who believe not only that the clue killer argument has a fatal contradiction in it, but that it actually points to another clue for God. In the last part of Dawkins's The God Delusion, he admits that since we are the product of natural selection, we can't completely trust our own senses. After all, evolution is interested only in preserving adaptive behavior, not true belief. In the New York Times Magazine article, another scientist says, in some circumstances, a symbolic belief that departs from factual reality fares better. In other words, paranoid false beliefs are often more effective at helping you survive than accurate ones. I don't believe Dawkins or other evolutionary theorists realize the full implications of this crucial insight. Evolution can only be trusted to give us cognitive faculties that help us live on, not to provide ones that give us an accurate and true picture of the world around us. Patricia Churchland puts it like this: the principal chore of brains is to get the body parts where they should be in order that the organism may survive. Improvements in sensory motor control confer an evolutionary advantage. A fancier style of representing the world is advantageous so long as it enhances the organism's chances for survival. Truth, whatever that is, takes the hindmost. Thomas Nagel, the prominent philosopher and atheist, agrees in the last chapter of his book, The Last Word. He writes that, to be sure my mind is telling me what is really, truly out there in the world, I must follow the rules of logic because they are correct, not merely because I am biologically programmed to do so. However, according to evolutionary biology, laws of reason would have to make sense to us only because they help us survive, not because they necessarily tell us truth. So Nagel asks, can we have any continued confidence in reason as a source of knowledge about the non-apparent character of the world? In itself, I believe an evolutionary story of the human race tells against such confidence. Evolutionists say that if God makes sense to us, it is not because he is really there. It is only because that belief helped us survive, and so we are hardwired for it. However, if we can't trust our belief-forming faculties to tell us the truth about God, why should we trust them to tell us the truth about anything, including evolutionary science? If our cognitive faculties only tell us what we need to survive, not what is true, why trust them about anything at all? It seems that evolutionary theorists have to do one of two things. They could backtrack and admit that we can trust what our minds tell us about things, including God. If we find arguments or clues to God's existence that seem compelling to us, well, maybe he's really there. Or else, they could go forward and admit that we can't trust our minds about anything. What is not fair is to do what so many evolutionary scientists are doing now. They are applying the scalpel to their skepticism. They're applying the scalpel of their skepticism to what our minds tell us about God, but not to what our minds are telling us about evolutionary science itself. This is a huge Achilles heel in the whole enterprise of evolutionary biology and theory. Alvin Plantinga points out that Charles Darwin himself saw this major vulnerability. To a friend, Darwin wrote that the horrid doubt always arises whether the convictions of man's mind, which has been developed from the mind of lower animals, are of any value or at all trustworthy. Plantinga then proceeds to argue that it is ultimately irrational to accept evolutionary naturalism, the theory that everything in us is caused only by natural selection. If it were true, we couldn't trust the methods by which we arrived at it or any scientific theory at all. People like Dawkins hold that there is a conflict between science and religion. The truth of the matter, however, is that the conflict is between science and naturalism, not between science and belief in God. It's as likely, given unguided evolution, that we live in a sort of dream world as that we actually know something about ourselves and our world. Despite popular books like those of Dennett, Dawkins, and Harris, which try to use the evolutionary clue killer on religion, more and more thinkers are seeing through it, and not just Orthodox believers, but those like Thomas Nagel. Leon Wieseltier, the literary editor of the New Republic, points out the flaw in the clue killer argument in his review of Dennett's book, Breaking the Spell. Dennett portrays reason in service to natural selection and as a product of a natural selection. But if reason is a product of natural selection, then how much confidence can we have in a rational argument for natural selection? The power of reason is owed to the independence of reason, and to nothing else. Evolutionary biology cannot invoke the power of reason even as it destroys it. It comes down to this. If, as the evolutionary scientists say, what our brains tell us about morality, love, and beauty is not real, if it is merely a set of chemical reactions designed to pass on our genetic code, then so is what their brains tell them about the world. Then why should they trust them? The clue killer is really a clue. I think that ultimately the supposed clue killer ends up showing us one more clue for God to put beside the others. The first clue is that the very existence of the world, the Big Bang. The secular person rightly responds, but that doesn't prove God exists. Maybe the Big Bang just caused itself. The second clue is the fine-tuning of the universe. Cause itself? You have to exist in order to cause things. So if you don't exist, you don't cause things. So it's self-contradictory. All right. Anyway, the second clue is the fine-tuning of the universe. The 1 in a trillion chance that our universe supports organic and human life. Again, the secular person can very fairly respond, but that doesn't prove God. It can be through sheer random circumstance that this universe is the one that was formed. Another clue is the regularity of nature. All scientific inductive reasoning is based on the assumption of this, though we haven't the slightest rational justification for assuming it will continue. When believers have responded that this is a clue to God's existence, non-believers retort rightly, we don't know why nature is regular, it just is. That doesn't prove God. Another clue is the clue of beauty and meaning. If we are the product of meaningless, accidental forces of nature, believers ask, how do you account for the sense that we have the beauty? That beauty matters, that love and life are significant. The secular person responds, this doesn't prove God. We can explain all such senses and convictions through evolutionary biology. Our religious, ascetic, and moral intuitions are there only because they helped our ancestors survive. However, as many thinkers point out, if this argument proves anything at all, it proves too much. If we can't trust our belief-forming faculties in one area, and we should not trust them in any area. If there is no God, we should not trust our cognitive faculties at all. Oh, but we do, and that's the final clue. If we believe God exists, then our view of the universe gives us a basis for believing that cognitive faculties work, since God could make us able to form true beliefs and knowledge. If we believe in God, then the Big Bang is not mysterious, nor the fine-tuning of the universe, nor the regularity of nature. All the things that we see make perfect sense. Also, if God exists, our intuitions about the meaningfulness of beauty and love are to be expected. If you don't believe in God, not only are all these things profoundly inexplicable, but your view that there is no God would lead you not to expect them. Yeah, that's the thing. Like if naturalism is true and that nature is literally just space, time, and energy as you find it in its different forms, and there's no way to tell if the uniformity hypothesis applies or not, then there are no explanations. It's literally all everything that we observe, everything that we know, everything that we experience is all brute facts. It's such a crackpot of a worldview. I don't understand why it's so popular. Though you have little reason to believe your rational faculties work, you go on using them. It's so contradictory. Everything is a mystery on naturalism. There are no explanations, and there's no meaning and no value. It's like, why? If that's the case, why prefer it? Literally makes no sense. Literally makes no sense. There's no reason to prefer a worldview that's in mind here, like naturalism. All right. And some people are like, well, you shouldn't go beyond what is observable. We definitely observe that we live in a space-time world. We definitely observe energy, and we definitely observe it behaving in different ways. Okay. But we don't observe God in the same way. So that's going beyond what's evidenced. But then they go on and create metaphysical, hypotheses that are suitable for like multiverse stuff, when we have absolutely no observations about the external universes or other kinds of universes out there. So these kinds of evidences are used to create unseen, to create hypothetical structures that are unseeable, unobservable to us, and they don't explain all the data. It becomes super complicated, and it doesn't explain everything. When in contrast, the Christian worldview, God provides so much explanatory powers, and Christianity has way more explanatory scope. There are no explanations available to the naturalists that is not equally available to a person who believes in God. Okay? All naturalistic explanations are available to them. But there are definitely explanations available to the person that believes in God that are not available to the naturalist. They are at a severe disadvantage when it comes to explanations. So I don't know why. Why is it preferred? It makes literally no sense. All right, so Keller continues, you have no basis for believing that nature will go on regularly, but you continue to use inductive reasoning and language. You have no good reason to trust your senses that love and beauty matter, but you keep on doing it. C.S. Lewis puts this vividly. You can't accept in the lowest animal sense, be in love with a girl if you know and keep on remembering that all the beauties both of her person and of her character are a momentary and accidental pattern produced by the collision of atoms, and that your own response to them is only a sort of phosphorescence arising from the behavior of your genes. You can't go on getting very serious pleasure from music if you know and remember that its air of significance is a pure illusion, that you like it only because your nervous system is irrationally conditioned to like it. Of course, none of the clues we have been looking for actually proves God. Every one of them is rationally avoidable. However, their cumulative effect is, I think, provocative and potent. Though the secular view of the world is rationally possible, it doesn't make as much sense of all these things as the view that God exists. That's why we call them clues. The theory that there is a God who made the world accounts for the evidence that we see better than the theory that there is no God. Okay. Highlight this. I'm going to highlight this. I recommend you do the same. Okay. This is the point of the chapter. All right. And this is the point of why I'm preaching what I'm preaching. Why should I prefer my worldview over a competing worldview? The theory that there is a God who made the world accounts for the evidence we see better than a theory that there is no God. All right. And that's why we prefer the Christian worldview, because it more neatly explains everything and more naturally ties everything together. It actually provides explanation. All right. And I'm going to provide this little emote. Well said. All right. So always keep in mind, why do I prefer why do I prefer my worldview? Those who argue against the existence of God go right on using induction, language, and their cognitive faculties, all of which make far more sense in a universe in which a God has created and supports them all by his power. Beyond the clues. I can imagine someone saying at this point, so it's all inconclusive. All you are saying is that, on the whole, God probably exists, but nobody can make an airtight case. That means no one can know if there is a God or not. I don't agree. The next chapter, I want to do something very personal. I don't want to argue why God may exist. I want to demonstrate that you already know that God does exist. I like to convince the reader that whatever you may profess intellectually, belief in God is an unavoidable, basic belief that we cannot prove, but can't not know. We know God is there. That is why even when we believe with all our minds that life is meaningless, we simply can't live that way. We know better. And with that, we've reached the end of the chapter. And you know what that means? That means that we get to celebrate. Woohoo! Woohoo! If you made me, or if you were stuck with me through all of that, I commend you. I commend you. I personally really like the chapter. I think that these clues are very helpful, and you can go way deeper into all of them. But let's go ahead and we got there. We got there. There's so much that can be said about this chapter. So much. We've barely scratched the surface. Oh, don't forget to subscribe. Sorry about that. Let me turn that off. Don't forget to subscribe. Give me a thumbs up. But anyway, like there's a lot that can be said about this. A lot that can be said in this chapter. We skimmed over so much, but you know, like the world that we inhabit, you know, is definitely seems to be contingent. And if it could be otherwise, then why is it the way that it is if it's not something else? You know, if chaotic worlds are possible, then they comprise the vast majority of possible worlds. Okay, we should be in a world that is chaotic. Why are we not? Why is it? And even if the world isn't chaotic, how is it the case that it just happens to be configured in such a way for intelligent or for life like us to inhabit it? That cries out for an explanation. It screams explanation, you know? And why is it that we are the way that we are, you know? Why is it that we experience things? You know, the human experience is something that naturalism just completely fails on. It provides no explanation for that, you know? So I urge you to critically analyze naturalism. I urge you to ask, why should I prefer naturalism over a competing worldview like Christianity or even Islam or any other kind of worldview? But I especially say Christianity. Why should I prefer naturalism over Christianity? Analyze that. What kind of explanations are available? You know? Why should we prefer naturalism when it doesn't have as much explanatory scope, when it doesn't have any explanatory power, when we are unjustified in believing it's true? You know, if naturalism actually is true, then it's an unfalsifiable worldview. You can never prove that naturalism is actually true if it is true. But if it's not true, then it's false. It's able to be falsified, because if there is a being, a supernatural world, then that world, and if that world has the power to interact with our world, then the naturalism can be demonstrated to be false. And God has demonstrated that naturalism is false by interacting with the world himself, you know, in the form of his miracles and in the form of Jesus Christ and his work. Okay. Please look into this stuff. So important. Worldviews is so important. Okay. We are talking about here on this channel about things that have eternal significance. All right. And the consequences of failing to love God in a properly ordered way has eternal, significantly bad consequences. Eternal, significantly bad consequences. And I urge you to reconsider. All right. Anyway, I hope that this is helping to motivate you to look into these arguments for the existence of God, to look for these evidences in a deeper way, and that it helps you provide more reasons in your tool belt for why you are a Christian. And that is the goal of this channel: growth and learning. I want you guys to grow and learn from the the best minds that we have available. And so I'll see you next week when we read chapter 9 for the reason of God, talking about the knowledge of God. All right, so Dr. Keller is going to be explaining why we know that God actually exists, even when we say that we don't. Okay? Anyway, I'll see you next week. See you later, and God bless. Hey, before you go, I hope you enjoyed today's enlightening discussion during our Christian Apologetics book study. It's always a blessing to come together to explore our faith and grow in our understanding. Your participation means the world to me, and I'm grateful for your continued support of Northeast Christian Apologetics. Remember, you can stay connected with me and access valuable resources by visiting my website at nechristianapologetics.com. There you'll find a wealth of articles, videos, and recommended reading material to deepen your knowledge of Christian apologetics. If you're as passionate as I am about equipping believers to defend their faith and engage in meaningful conversations, you can also support this ministry in various ways. One way to support this work is through patreon.com. By becoming a patron, you'll have access to exclusive content, early access to our discussions, and a chance to connect with like-minded individuals who share your passion for Christian apologetics. If Patreon is not your style, some people prefer to give me a one-time tip. And if you'd like to do that, then feel free to do so through Venmo or Cash App. But of course, there are many ways to support me. By praying for this ministry, sharing the content on social media, or simply spreading the word about what I do. Every bit of support goes a long way in helping me fulfill my mission. Once again, thank you for joining me today. Your presence and engagement enrich these discussions, and together, we're on a journey to strengthen our faith and share the good news with others. Stay tuned for more exciting book studies, thought-provoking discussions, and opportunities to grow your Christian apologetics journey. I look forward to seeing you again.